Okay? One thing is not true. Let's go on. Also, we're given a history of the African Holocaust, the slave trade. That's part of our history? The slave trade is not our history. We did not do the slave trade. We were victims of the slave trade. The slave trade is the history of Europeans, people from up here, exporting people down here. Okay? These people up here came out of the Ice Age and began to colonize these people and take all of our resources, okay? Why are we here today? We're here today to set the record straight. All the black people in North America did not come here on slave ships. All the black people in America did not come on slave ships. There are from time immemorial, beginning of time, there were black people on every piece of land on this planet. The problem is we've been given a map. Okay. Next. The average people of America, right here, right, very good. We've been given a map of the world that's distorted. We have the continent of Africa. The continent of Africa is the only continent on the planet that is set into the soil, into the ground. All of the continents, South America, North America, Australia, Greenland, all these continents drift. Africa is set in the ground. Okay, next. This is the way it was at the beginning of time. All these are once connected. Can you see how South America fits perfectly into Africa? You have right here North America and Africa fitting together. And you have here a map that I was taught about on the river. Okay?
And so this says the point of origin, Detroit, Michigan. We're going to start here, even though this is not the point of origin of Detroit, Michigan. So let's be clear. Detroit, the original inhabitants of Detroit, Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe live along what we now know as the Detroit River. They build their settlement along the river for trading purposes and, of course, for fishing and transportation to go from one place to the other. Of course, they were boating. And these indigenous people had a number of settlements along the river. Number of settlements. So when we're talking about indigenous people, we're talking about primarily, most people mean the Native Americans. You know, I use all three so that people know what I'm talking about. If I say indigenous, some people may not know what I mean by that, but I also say Native Americans. And then even every now and then I may say the people they call Indians. Pottery is a mixture of two styles of pottery: Europeans and the indigenous Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe people who are already in Detroit. The mixture of those two styles is Pewaukee pottery.
Stand next to Jamal.
Now, what is this picture? Native Americans here, indigenous people, white folks, the white woman and her two kids. That's Lady Marie Calice de Cadillac. Her arrival less than a year after her husband founded Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit. She comes months after him and lives inside of the fort. Marie Therese de Cadillac. There's the point of origin, Detroit, Michigan. We're going to start here, even though this is not the point of origin of Detroit, Michigan. So let's be clear. Detroit, the original inhabitants of Detroit, Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe live along what we now know as the Detroit River. They build their settlement along the river for trading purposes and, of course, for fishing and transportation to go from one place to the other. Of course, they were boating. And these indigenous people had a number of settlements along the river. Number of settlements. So Hannah and Peter, Hannah Dennison and Peter Dennison, who were owned by the McCombs and were sold to the Tuckers. The Tuckers William Tucker wrote in his will that when I and my wife died, the Hannah and Peter, we're going to free them because they were very loyal slaves. They did their work. We're going to free them. But their children, their 6 children, they're going to be slaves for our children. We're not freeing their children. We're just freeing the parents. So here, the Northwest Territory was all free. People came to Detroit to get their freedom. Michigan was a free state. That's only part of the story. The other part is, for the people who are already living here, the French and British, they continued practicing slavery all the way up into the 1840s. So Detroit is unlike most northern cities. Like I said, most northern cities, most of them by the mid-1800s, by the 1815, 1820, there were, most northern cities, slavery was over. Okay? And the few that did not end slavery continued it until the Civil War. They didn't end it, they didn't end it until the Civil War happened. But Detroit is in a weird position because the French and British are allowed to continue practicing slavery even though it's the United States territory and it's supposed to be free. But the French and British residents who were living here prior to it becoming the United States, they could continue practicing slavery because you got that here. But Canada ended slavery before the United States. But at one time Canada had slavery. You got people escaping from Canada to come to Detroit to get free, and people escaping from Detroit to go to Canada to get free at the same time.
Wow. So the people who were enslaved by the British
in Canada
were
here
were escaping over
to
there.
Canada because Canada ended slavery before the United States and before Detroit. And you had people in Canada. You had people in Detroit going there because once they got there, they were in another country. They were free. And the United States didn't have any extradition treaty with the country they just fought a war with. So it wasn't like they were going to work this out and send the people back. But on the flip side, you had people from Canada who was enslaved in Canada coming to the United States because the Northwest Ordinance said this was free territory. So people was coming here.
In 1543, Hernandez de Soto and his Spanish Conquistador army was met by a large nation of black Indians in North Louisiana near Monroe and the Ouachita River as the Spanish was trying to colonize Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and the entire Gulf Coast. And that's just in North Louisiana that there was a whole bunch of black Indians. And that passage is found in the primitive black nations of America. And prior to Hernandez de Soto coming to Louisiana to colonize the Gulf Coast, he had arrived in Florida, off the coast of Florida, and automatically started warring with the Florida Indians, who was giving them hell the whole time. And De Soto had described the Florida Indians that he was at war with as being very large black Indians in an aspect different from those from the interior of North America because of the climate that they lived in. Because of the humid sun that they lived in, their complexion was very dark-skinned and they had woolly hair. And that passage is found in the History of Hernandez de Soto by Bernard Shipp.
I'm so excited to share this with you. So this book right here was written in 1670, and it was basically like an introduction to globes. So the book states many times that the globe is not what we've been taught, but if we try hard, we can adopt it into our current knowledge. The author basically threatens that if you don't, you won't know anything about trigonometry or land navigation. Now get this, the author supports his claims by reflecting on the fact that people thought California was a part of North America when really it's an island. So he's saying basically, believe me, the world is a globe because California is an island. Oh my God. So I got curious. I was like, let me see some maps from this time period. And Lord and behold, they got California as an island. Boom, there goes another one. And again, and another one. Can't make this up. Every single map pre-1800s depicts California as an island. Why? How is it that the people from Asia, Spain, and England all made the same unique mistake of making California an island? So I look a little closer at California and it says Carolinas. Carolina is a female name of German origin that means free/beautiful woman. Let's run that back. The name ultimately comes from Germanic word Carla, who means free woman. Let's get deeper, y'all. In Las Surgas, Calafia was described as a black warrior queen who ruled the mythical island of California. The island was inhabited only by black women who lived like Amazon warriors. What? California could have possibly been ruled by black women? Montalvo, who is the author of that book, is said to have gotten a book that mentions Queen Calafia and her black Amazon warriors. So therefore, he was not the original author. It must be older than the date was published in 1510. Is this some ancient history we don't know about? This picture is showing men from Spain arriving to, I guess, the California island full of black Amazon warriors. Why would they add Carolinas if it was not inspired by historical events? Is this really a myth or a legend, or are they just not telling us something? Because these myths and legends collaborate well with these old maps and real events. And you can pause this and read this yourself. But African skulls have been found in the Americas. So are we Native Americans? And for those of you that think the author made a mistake by calling those women black, Europeans, Americans, Spaniards never mistook American Indians for Negro Africans. They always referred to the blacks of the Negro African type as Moors, blacks, or Ethiopians. It wasn't a mistake. But anyways, back to, this book. If they will lie about who the true Native Americans are, they will lie about the earth being flat.
Settlement of Monacan Town. But before we do that, I wanted to introduce you guys to the Monacan Indian Nation, whom the town is named after. Brief introduction here, I'm at the monacannation.com. It says when the first colonists arrived at Jamestown in 1607, they immediately met with Indian people on the eastern shore of Virginia. These Indians belonged to the vast Powhatan autocracy. They spoke Algonquin languages. Alright, so that's on the shore. Now, on the Piedmont and mountain regions of this area lived the Siouan Indians of the Monacan and Manahoac tribes. Alright, the Siouan, remember? Shout out to a new breed, we had him on recently, explaining to us his ancestry, Siouan ancestry, Eastern Siouan ancestry. And this is another tribe that's Siouan, very little, one of those tribes that we know little about. This is the Monacan Nation we're going to be talking about today, and what happened to them when the French Huguenots, aka Moors as we're going to see, arrived. They had arranged in a confederation ranging from the Roanoke River Valley to the Potomac River, and from the fall line at Richmond and Fredericksburg west through the Blue Ridge Mountains. At this time, the Virginia Siouans numbered more than 10,000 people. They were an agricultural people who grew the Three Sisters crops of corn, beans, and squash, and they had domesticated a wide variety of other foods. And I just want to add that these Siouan tribes, again, they're coming from the Ohio. A lot of the mound builder culture, and ancient people. So they were people who brought the knowledge of the Three Sisters to a lot of these eastern tribes. That is something you can research. They lived in villages with palisaded walls, and their homes were dome-shaped structures of bark and reed mats. These Monacan ancestors hunted deer, elk, and small game, and they would leave their villages every year to visit their hunting camps. The Monacans traded with the Powhatans to the east and the Iroquois to the north. They mined copper, which they wore in necklaces, and which the Powhatans prized greatly. The Monacans also buried their dead in mounds, a tradition that differentiates them from the neighboring Indian nations. Throughout the Piedmont and mountain regions, 13 mounds have been identified and many excavated, yielding interesting information about the lives of these first Americans whose ancestors inhabited this region for more than 10,000 years. Alright, so when we're talking about people living in this area of the James River, the Siouan tribes have been there a very, very long time already. They are referred to as the aboriginal people of this land. I also want to emphasize, the mounds, right? Again, they're coming from the mound builders. So yes, it's logical that they would be leaving behind mounds. And also the copper. They know how to mine copper because again, they're Ohio, the origin, they're a lot closer to these copper mines in Michigan and the Great Lakes. They had that knowledge with them already that they brought down with them.
Trader makes his way up the Maroney River, aided by friendly natives. His object? To trade small manufactured goods with the primitive Indians along its banks for their spears, baskets, and primitive artifacts. His expedition must cut its way through the dense jungle overgrowth and often has to eat only what nature provides. And now, here's the man you saw in the film earlier, Mr. Herman Jessen. Proud to have you with us, Mr. Jessen.
Thank you, John.
I'd like to ask, first of all, sir, how remote are these Indians from civilization?
These Indians live about 250 miles up the Maroney River. It's very hard to get up there because the rains endanger any trip, and the river is either too low or too high. It's just in July that one can penetrate into those villages.
Now, is this your first trip into this area?
No, into this area it's my second trip, but I've made 25 trips into South America so far, and I expect to leave very shortly on another one.
Well, where are you from originally?
I was born in Europe, but now I am engaged in the import-export business, and I spend about half of my time down in the Amazon jungles and the other half of my time here in Los Angeles.
Well, we're all anxious to see what being an Amazon trader really means, so let's start now.
We start in the town of Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni in French Guiana on the Maroni River. This river divides Dutch Guiana from French Guiana, and the native quarters house these beautiful canoes in which the natives use. Two of the men who made this trip with me, my companions, on a long journey trading with the natives of this region. The things that I used for trading with these people are mirrors, fish hooks, beads, flashlights, also tobacco and salt and sugar that the natives can use. I'm trading a knife for a comb and a basket for beads. Our boat was 50 foot long and 4 feet wide, and there were 4 of us going on this long trip up the Maroni River. We are leaving the town and passing by the native quarters, and we are on our way to Mukumak Mountains and trading with the natives of the region.
How long a river trip will this be, Mr. Jessen?
It's about 2 months trip, John.
And how long will it be in terms of miles?
It's about 500 miles each way. We are getting our guns ready as we are living off the land. You'll see that later. This little boy is one of the sons of the Bushmen, and I gave him a piece of chewing gum, and that's what he did with it. He couldn't figure it out. To pole our way into this native Pony Bushman village. This is the harbor, and here are some of the typical canoes. Tutu presenting.
First men to perceive and define the river called it Mahitchiktuk, and to them the river was seen as a living power. These people of the river journeyed from the west some 6,000 years ago, and there is a legend that their god told them to journey eastward till they reached a river that flowed both ways, and that this would be a fertile land where their people would prosper.
There are no Indians living along the river now, but there was a time when there were many villages along its banks.
So, this is Canada. We all know that Canadians like to pretend they're further north than Americans are, but they're really not, and I'm going to prove it to you. This is the 49th parallel, the longest border between two countries anywhere in the world, and the one that's most often thought of as being the dividing line between Canada and America. It's true that most Americans do, in fact, live south of this line, but so do most Canadians. In fact, roughly 70% of all Canadians live south of the 49th in this land shaded red, but we can go even lower. A full 50% of all Canadians live south of this line in this relatively tiny area shaded red. This means that most Canadians live further south than pretty much the entire US states of Washington, Montana, North Dakota, and obviously Alaska too. But I'm not done embarrassing Canada just yet. This is the southernmost point of Canada on Middle Island in Lake Erie. Zooming out to view more of the North American continent, would it surprise you if I told you that there are, in fact, more Americans who live north of this island than Canadians? Well, it shouldn't, because there are, and this is how. Here's the line of latitude drawn precisely over Middle Island's southernmost location. Clearly, all of Canada exists above this line, but a surprising amount of the United States does as well, including this tiny sliver of California. If you're from California, you can legitimately claim that some of your state goes further north than Canada's southernmost point does. With the line this far south, though, a lot of America's largest urban areas exist above Canada's southernmost point, like the entirety of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Alaska, and most of Wyoming, Michigan, New York State, and Massachusetts. Added up together, this means that more Americans live north of Canada's southernmost point than Canadians do.
A time of exploration in the New World. Detroit, a bustling outpost on an uncharted frontier. In 1701, a daring French explorer landed his waterborne expedition on the shores of the Detroit River, claiming the site for his own country, marking the birth of what is today the oldest city west of the Appalachians. Cadillac built his stockade, named it Fort Pontchartrain, and set the stage for a thrilling drama of civic growth. A century and a half later, a thriving Detroit was part of a vital new nation. Its stores offered the tools of expansion. Its people provided the muscle of progress. In the 1840s, Detroit was a center of commerce in the United States' vast western reaches, a rough-hewn town looking back upon a history of rule by two great European nations, France and Britain. More than 50 years of advance and reversal followed the United States annexation of the Michigan Territory. But by 1850, Detroit had formed a perspective. Its population had swelled to 21,000, and it was recognized as one of the nation's foremost port cities. People from the east poured into Detroit, enticed by the promise of unlimited opportunity to put their varied skills to work. As they came, the cluster of buildings near the riverfront grew ever larger, creeping out into the countryside. New streets were carved out of the forest and meadows, streets lighted with flickering gas flame, paved with cobblestone, and flanked by wooden walks. Detroit was eagerly giving way to progress, to prosperity, to the heady glow of prominence on the American scene. The city's importance to the nation's economy increased steadily. Newly built railroads picked up cargoes from lake and river vessels and carried them westward. Industry had begun to settle on the Detroit River, attracted by the convenience of natural resources, the growing western market, and good transportation. With the end of a second century in sight, Detroit continued its march toward industrial and commercial leadership. As the years passed, signs of the times came, then disappeared, each marking the thoughts, the accomplishments, the tastes of its era. But through all the changes on the face of Detroit, the will of its citizens to build a great city remained and strengthened. The population maintained its upward climb, the majority of the settlers fleeing the political and religious oppression, the economic insecurity of lands across the sea. Of hearty stock, fired with the ambition to provide well for their children, Detroit's foreign-born citizens became the backbone of progress. Their determination, their willingness to work, transformed lumber from the great pine forests, iron ore and copper from the Upper Peninsula, farm products from all of southern Michigan, into useful products to help clothe, house, and feed their fellow citizens throughout America. By 1890, goods flowing from Detroit to markets throughout the world included iron and steel products, paint and varnish, copper and brass products, stoves, pharmaceuticals, and near the turn of the century, the first Detroit-made automobiles appeared on American roads, harbingers of our emergence as the automotive capital of the world. The spot on which Cadillac landed his expedition has seen many changes. The banks of the Detroit River were the focal point in our early days. Our city grew outward from this point, and with growth, the importance of the riverfront faded. The interests of Detroiters moved outward. The land that nurtured our success was left to the ravages of time. Buildings entered old age, and Detroit forgot the heritage on which it was built. But today, civic pride has brought about a renaissance. Detroiters once again turn admiring eyes toward the riverfront and its magnificent new civic center. The growth of Detroit has been unique. The waterfront, where the city had its origins, has again become the center of civic activity, and the civic center is proving a boon to the entire downtown section. Modernization is going on from Grand Circus Park to the river, from east to west. From one end of our business district to the other, new construction is springing up to change the appearance of our city. Long-range plans for the modernization of Detroit are ambitious, with many civic and private agencies working to put ideas now on paper into reality. Detroit's original design provided for wide thoroughfares, which lend themselves well to our planning for the future. A leisurely downtown atmosphere, combining beauty and utility, is the goal. The years ahead promise broad malls and tree-shaded walks, free from traffic congestion, for modern expressways will funnel automobiles directly into spacious off-street and underground parking garages. Private business and commerce are following the lead of our city government by improving their own properties. So the overall effect will be one of careful planning. Our bold design for Detroit's future is aimed at transforming the industrial capital of the world into a capital of distinctive beauty and comfort. The Civic Center, nucleus of our downtown redevelopment, was started in 1950 with the Veterans Memorial Building. Built at a cost of $6 million, its white marble facade pays tribute to those who gave their lives for their country. Across Jefferson Avenue, the striking City-County building gives the Civic Center a gleaming tower of marble and glass, while answering the long-time need for a centralized office for both city and county governments. It's composed of 2 units, one rising 20 stories, the second providing another 13 floors of useful workspace. The center's third completed unit is the Henry and Edsel Ford Auditorium, a truly magnificent gift from the Ford Motor Company. As home of the world-famed Detroit Symphony Orchestra, this modern 3,000-seat music hall has played host to thousands of music lovers. The tremendous number of visitors drawn to the downtown area by the Civic Center, and the even larger number it will attract when completed, requires adequate facilities for parking thousands of cars. Ample provision is being made for this need. By using the new expressway, motorists will be able to drive from the suburbs to the Civic Center and into its vast underground parking garage with scarcely a single stop for traffic lights. The 80-acre Civic Center has replaced hundreds of buildings that had outlived their usefulness. 30 square blocks were cleared between the river and Larned Street, and east and west from Randolph Street to 3rd Avenue. The final result will be an impressive attraction for citizens and visitors alike. Modern, useful buildings separated by handsome landscaping. A happy wedding of glass, marble, and steel with the vibrant colors and clear air of the out of doors. Detroit's long-recognized need for a spacious hall to house large conventions and other gatherings will be filled with completion of the tremendous Convention Hall and Exhibits building just west of the Veterans Memorial Building. Begun as a gift to the city on its 250th anniversary, the structure promises to be one of the finest of its type in the world, a fitting addition to our plan to make Detroit a model of urban development. The circular hall at the eastern end of the unit will provide ample space for large gatherings such as civic, industrial, and political conventions. At capacity, the hall will seat 14,000 people. When seats on the ground level are removed, an arena of nearly 24,000 square feet will be revealed, surrounded by seating for 10,000 spectators. The long, low exhibits building will provide a total of 400,000 square feet of floor space for trade and industrial exhibitions of every type. Parking will be provided for 2,800 cars on the exhibits building roof, underground and outside the unit at ground level. Funds for construction in the Civic Center area have been donated by business, industry, and individual citizens, a shining example of civic cooperation for the good of our town. Expected additions to the Civic Center in the future include a new federal building and a luxury hotel to help house exhibit guests and convention delegates. A sloping plaza planned for the area between the Ford Auditorium and the Veterans Memorial Building will have grass, shade trees, broad walks, and a reflecting pool which may be used for ice skating in the winter. The center's pleasant vistas will afford an ideal place to relax for business people during the day or for folks on a holiday outing. As a major part of the project, the shoreline in front of the Civic Center was straightened and faced with a steel and concrete wall. In conjunction with construction of the Civic Center, the entire shoreline of the Detroit River is being rehabilitated to accommodate increased shipping from the St. Lawrence Seaway. Private construction is also scheduled for the waterfront. Detroit is planning for tomorrow. From one end of the city to another, the facilities for modern living are being built to serve citizens of the present and the future. The maturity of our town is symbolized by activity on the waterfront, the site at which Detroit was born, the site from which we grew into America's fifth largest city, the site to which we've returned for new inspiration. As in 1701, a discovery is being made here, the discovery that Detroit today is making way for Detroit tomorrow. The progress of Detroit and its metropolitan area is linked closely with the services offered business, industry, and individual citizens by its banks. Services which answer nearly every financial need of Greater Detroit's 3.5 million citizens. Throughout the city, in the central business district, in every neighborhood, in suburban areas, the banks of Detroit play an important part in community life. Hundreds of banking offices offer convenient, helpful service and security in financial matters. The banks of Detroit are intensely interested in the future of our area, and through the years they've geared their activities to provide financial assistance in building that future. They've kept a finger on the public pulse, changing and adding to their operations whenever the need for new services appeared. Flexible policies have kept the banks of our city alert. Their long history has given them broad experience in handling the many financial services required by the forward-thinking people of America's fifth largest city.